Hey everyone, Elizabeth here. The Last Laugh delivers stories that leave you speechless. If you're here for it, hit subscribe and let's go.
You sign the waiver, you walk away with $40,000. You refuse, you get zero. My brother Marcus slid the document across the conference table like he was dealing a card he'd already counted on winning. The paper stopped just short of my hands. I didn't reach for it. We all agree, he added, glancing around the room. Every head nodded. My mother, my Aunt Patricia, my cousin Devin, who had flown in from Phoenix specifically for this occasion. Even my brother's wife, Shelley, sitting behind him against the wall, arms folded, nodding along like she'd rehearsed it. I looked at the paper. Then I looked at Marcus. He was wearing the charcoal suit he reserved for moments he wanted to feel powerful. The one Grandma had actually complimented once years ago at Easter. He'd been wearing it to important occasions ever since, as though her approval had somehow transferred into the fabric. Before I sign anything, I said, keeping my voice completely level, maybe someone in this room can explain the $318,000 missing from the rental account since 2018. The nodding stopped. My mother's expression didn't change exactly, but something behind her eyes shifted. A small, involuntary flinch, the look of a person who has just heard a sound they weren't expecting. Marcus laughed. It was a short laugh, practiced and dismissive. What are you talking about? I turned to the man seated at the far end of the table. He had been quiet since introductions, a compact man in his 50s with reading glasses perched on his nose and 3 color-coded binders stacked beside his legal pad. He hadn't said a word during the entire opening of the meeting. He had simply waited. Mr. Calloway, I said. Would you like to go ahead? Raymond Calloway, CPA, CFE, Certified Fraud Examiner, opened the first binder. Marcus stood up so fast his chair rolled backward and hit the credenza. My grandmother, Eleanor Voss, spent 41 years building what most people in our family called the properties. As though they were an abstraction, a background detail, a thing that existed like weather. 8 single-family rental homes across Central Florida, purchased one at a time starting in 1979. Each one selected with the kind of deliberate patience that only becomes visible in retrospect. She drove every neighborhood herself. She interviewed every tenant personally. She kept every maintenance receipt in a fire-rated filing cabinet in the spare bedroom of her house in Clearwater, organized by property address and year, going back to Reagan's first term. My grandmother was not a warm woman exactly. She was precise. She was consistent. She believed in showing up and following through, and she extended those standards to her family with the same even hand she used on everything else, which meant that when you fell short she told you plainly, and when you succeeded she acknowledged it with a nod and moved on. Affection in her vocabulary looked like reliability. Looked like being trusted with something real. She trusted me with the properties when I was 26 years old. Not officially, not yet. But the summer after I finished my accounting degree, she invited me to Clearwater for what she described as a working visit. I thought it would be a few days. It turned into 6 weeks. Every morning we drove to a different property. She showed me the leases, the maintenance logs, the tax filings. She explained how she calculated acceptable vacancy rates and how she thought about refinancing decisions and why she had never, in 4 decades, hired a property management company. The moment you hand it to someone else, she told me once, sitting in the passenger seat while I navigated to a duplex in Lakeland, you stop knowing what you own. I didn't know then that she was teaching me on purpose. Marcus, 4 years older, had been the family's designated future inheritor since childhood. He was firstborn, male, charming in the way our family rewarded. Easy smile, confident handshake, the ability to fill a room with the sense that things were being handled. He had gone into sales, done reasonably well, and somewhere in his mid-30s discovered that managing Grandma's properties, the actual logistical daily work of them, was far more lucrative than anything he was selling. He offered to take it over in 2017. Grandma was 81. Her knees were bad. The offer seemed reasonable to everyone except, I think, Grandma herself, who agreed with a carefulness I didn't understand at the time. She called me 2 weeks after Marcus took over the accounts. I want you to keep copies of everything, she said. Of what? Everything he sends me. The statements, the maintenance invoices, the deposit records. Forward them to your personal email and keep them somewhere he can't reach. Don't say anything to anyone. I asked her why. She was quiet for a moment. Because I didn't raise you to be foolish and I didn't build this to watch it disappear. I did exactly what she asked. For 6 years I forwarded every document. I kept a running file. I flagged anomalies I noticed but said nothing about. Maintenance invoices that seemed high, deposits that arrived late, expenses billed to properties that hadn't had a tenant in months. In 2020, Grandma called a different attorney than the one the family had always used. A woman named Sandra Okafor, an estate planning specialist in Tampa. I know this because Grandma told me and because I drove her to the appointment. I waited in the parking lot for 2 hours reading a novel, and when she came out she looked the way she always looked after completing something she'd planned carefully. Settled, quiet, done. She didn't explain what had been signed that day. She just said, "It's handled," and asked me to take her to lunch. Eleanor Voss died 14 months ago in February at 87 years old in her own home in her own bed, surrounded by the people she chose. She had outlasted 2 of her own children and most of her contemporaries, and she died with the same precision she had applied to everything else. Her affairs were in order, her instructions were clear, and she had made absolutely certain that the people she trusted were in a position to act on what she'd left them. It took 14 months for Marcus to call the meeting. I lived in Atlanta. That was the detail my family used most often when explaining why I was peripheral. Not just geographically peripheral but peripherally peripheral, a person who had chosen distance and therefore couldn't complain about being left out of things. What I actually did in Atlanta was work as a senior financial analyst at a healthcare consulting firm, a job I was good at and that paid well and that I found genuinely interesting, which I knew made me unusual and didn't bother pretending otherwise. I had a 2-bedroom apartment near Inman Park with a 2nd bedroom I used as an office. I had a friend group I'd built slowly and kept carefully, my college roommate Diane, who was now a pediatric nurse. A man named Kwame I'd met at a cycling class and who had become one of my closest friends. My colleague Priya, who made me laugh harder than almost anyone I knew. I had built a life that fit me, which sounds simple but had required for me several years of deliberate construction following a period when nothing fit at all. I didn't talk about that period with my family. I didn't talk about much with my family. What I did quietly in the background of my actual life was maintain the file. When Raymond Calloway's name came up, it was through Diane. Her brother-in-law had used him in a business dispute, a contractor situation involving falsified invoices, and she mentioned it over dinner one night because I had made a comment, vague enough that I thought she wouldn't notice, about being concerned about some financial records I'd been tracking. Diane noticed everything. "If you think something's wrong," she said, "stop thinking and find out." I called Calloway's office the following Monday. Our first meeting was a video call, 90 minutes, during which I shared my screen and walked him through 6 years of documented discrepancies. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "How long have you been keeping these records?" he asked. "Since 2017. "On whose instruction?" "My grandmother's." He nodded slowly, the way experienced people nod when something confirms a suspicion they'd formed early. "I'll need 90 days and access to the original bank records. If what you're showing me is accurate, you're looking at systematic skimming, rental deposits diverted before they hit the account, maintenance invoices issued to shell vendors, possibly more." "How much?" I asked. "Based on what you've shown me?" "Conservatively, 250,000. Could be significantly higher when we get into the actual statements." It was higher. The letter arrived 6 weeks before the meeting. A formal notice from the estate attorney Marcus had retained, a man named Gerald Fitch at a firm I didn't recognize, outlining the proposed distribution of Eleanor Voss's estate. The letter was addressed to me at my parents' address in Tampa, which meant it had been sitting there for 11 days before my mother thought to call me about it. The proposed distribution was as follows. Marcus would receive all 8 rental properties. My mother would receive the Clearwater house. I would receive the contents of a savings account currently valued at approximately $40,000. My cousin Devin, who had attended perhaps 4 family events in the last decade, would receive the antique furniture. There was no mention of any superseding documents. There was no mention of Sandra Okafor. There was no mention of the 2-hour appointment in Tampa in 2020, or anything signed that afternoon, or anything that had happened between my grandmother and me across 30 years of careful attention. I read the letter twice, sitting on my couch in Atlanta while Kwame waited in my kitchen about to make dinner. I set it on the coffee table. "Everything okay?" he called. "Getting there," I said. I called Sandra Okafor the next morning. She confirmed what I already knew, that my grandmother had established an irrevocable trust in November 2020, naming me as sole trustee and primary beneficiary of all 8 rental properties. The trust had been properly recorded with the Pinellas County Clerk's Office. The quitclaim deeds had been executed, witnessed, and filed. Every instrument was in order. I called Raymond Calloway next. "The meeting's in 6 weeks," I told him. "Can you be ready?" "I've been ready for 3 months," he said. "Just tell me where to be." I spent the following 2 weeks doing something that felt strange and necessary in equal measure. I said nothing to anyone in my family. My mother called twice asking whether I'd reviewed the distribution proposal. I told her I was looking into it. My brother texted once, a single message that read, "Let me know if you have questions about the numbers. Happy to walk you through it." I read it 3 times. I did not respond. The law offices of Gerald Fitch and Associates were on the 14th floor of a glass tower in downtown Tampa with a view of the bay that was prettier than anything going on inside it. I arrived 20 minutes early and sat in the reception area drinking bad coffee and going over my checklist one more time. Sandra Okafor was meeting me there. She had been brisk and professional over the phone, and in person she was exactly the same. A tall woman in her early 60s with close-cropped silver hair and the manner of someone who had sat through a great many rooms full of people behaving badly and had learned to find it mildly interesting rather than distressing. She shook my hand, set her briefcase on the chair beside me and said, "Tell me what you think is going to happen in there." "They're going to present the waiver first," I said. "Marcus will frame it as a generous offer. My mother will back him up. They'll try to get me to sign before the meeting formally opens, or immediately after Fitch reads the distribution. And when you don't sign, Marcus will push harder. He'll get loud if I push back. Then we let Calloway do his part." She nodded. "And the trust documents? You have originals." "I have certified copies. Calloway has referenced them in his report." "Good." She looked at me evenly. "How are you feeling?" It was a question I hadn't expected from her, and for a moment I didn't know how to answer it. The honest answer was something layered, that I had been carrying this for 6 years, that I had loved my grandmother with a particular intensity that I had never quite known how to show while she was alive, that sitting in this conference room about to dismantle something my brother had been building for years felt less like triumph and more like a long exhale, that I was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "Ready," I said, which was true. It was just not the whole truth. Raymond Calloway arrived at 2 minutes to the hour with his 3 binders and his reading glasses and the calm, unhurried energy of a man who had done this exact thing many times before. He nodded at me, introduced himself to Sandra, and took his seat at the far end of the table without saying anything else. Gerald Fitch opened the meeting at 10 o'clock with a summary of the estate, the properties, their assessed values, the savings account, the house. He read it in the tone of someone delivering settled facts, occasionally glancing at Marcus as though checking for approval. Marcus sat at the center of the table. My mother was to his left. Devon was there, freshly tanned, nodding at intervals. Shelley was against the wall. I sat directly across from Marcus, with Sandra to my right and Calloway at the far end. Fitch had barely finished when Marcus leaned forward and slid the document across the table. It was a single page, dense with legal language, with a signature line at the bottom and a post-it note with $40,000 written on it in Marcus's handwriting. As though the number were so generous it deserved to be highlighted. "We've been more than fair," Marcus said. "You get the liquid cash. No complications, no delays. Everybody walks out of here today done." "We all agree," he added, looking around. The nodding moved around the table like a wave. I looked at the paper. I looked at my brother. "Before I sign anything," I said, "maybe someone can explain the $318,000 missing from the rental account since 2018. The nodding stopped. My mother made a sound, not quite a word. More like the beginning of one. Marcus laughed, short and practiced. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the rental deposits from the Lakeland property that were diverted to a separate account between April 2018 and January 2022. I'm talking about 18 maintenance invoices totaling $64,000 issued to a vendor called Coastal Property Solutions LLC, which was incorporated in 2018 and lists you as registered agent, Marcus." I'm talking about the Sarasota property vacancy that was reported to Grandma for 11 months while the unit was actually occupied and rent was being collected. Silence. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Mr. Calloway, I said. Would you like to go ahead? Raymond Calloway opened the first binder. Marcus stood up so fast his chair rolled back and hit the credenza. He took 2 steps toward the door before Gerald Fitch said, Mr. Voss, I'd strongly advise you to sit down. Marcus stopped. He turned. His face had gone through several colors in rapid succession and had settled on something between gray and furious. This is fabricated, he said. Whatever she told you to put together. The source documents are the original bank statements, Mr. Voss, Calloway said without looking up from the binder. Subpoenaed directly from First National. I didn't receive anything from your sister except the discrepancy log she maintained, which was what prompted the investigation. Everything in these 3 binders comes from the financial institutions themselves. Calloway turned a tab section toward the center of the table. Would you like to start at the beginning, or would you prefer I summarize the findings? Summarize, Sandra said. Certainly. He settled his glasses. The total amount diverted from Eleanor Voss's rental accounts between January 2018 and her death in February of last year is $318,412. This breaks down as follows. $142,000 in redirected rental deposits across 4 properties, $91,000 in fraudulent vendor payments to Coastal Property Solutions LLC, and $85,000 in miscellaneous expense charges that have no corresponding receipts or service records. My mother had both hands flat on the table. Devon was staring at Marcus. Shelley had stood up from her chair against the wall but hadn't moved anywhere. Additionally, Calloway continued, the records show that 2 properties were reported as vacant to Mrs. Voss for extended periods while simultaneously generating rental income. The Sarasota property collected 11 months of rent, approximately $36,000, during a period Marcus Voss reported to his grandmother as a vacancy. Marcus pointed at me from across the room. You did this to destroy me. You did this, I said quietly. I just kept the receipts. Gerald Fitch had stopped taking notes. He was looking at Marcus with the expression of a man rapidly calculating his own exposure. Sandra Okafor set her briefcase on the table and opened it. While Mr. Calloway completes his summary, I'd like to introduce the second matter. She slid a document to Gerald Fitch. In November 2020, Eleanor Voss established an irrevocable living trust with my office as the executing firm. All 8 rental properties were conveyed to that trust via properly executed and recorded quitclaim deeds. The trust names my client, she nodded toward me, as sole trustee and primary beneficiary. These documents supersede any testamentary distribution, as they represent completed inter vivos transfers. The properties did not pass through the estate because they were no longer part of the estate at Mrs. Voss's death. Gerald Fitch looked at the documents. He looked at them for a long time. That's not possible, Marcus said, but his voice had lost its shape. The confidence had drained out of it and what was left was something thin and confused, a man trying to understand how the ground had disappeared beneath him. It's recorded with the Pinellas County Clerk, Sandra said. I can provide the recording numbers if you'd like to verify in real time. My mother started crying. Not the loud, theatrical kind, the quiet kind which was somehow harder to be in the room with. She was looking at Marcus and her face had the expression of a person watching someone they love become a stranger. I had thought in the months of preparation that this moment would feel a certain way, that there would be satisfaction in it, something clean and completing. What I actually felt was heavier than that. My grandmother had known. She had known for 6 years what Marcus was doing to the thing she'd built, and she had watched it happen and said nothing to him and quietly, methodically, made sure it couldn't touch what she was leaving to me. The weight of that, her silence, her strategy, the particular loneliness of a woman in her 80s watching her grandson steal from her and choosing a long game over a confrontation, settled into me like something I would carry for a long time. The $40,000, I said looking at Marcus. That was from her savings account. Money she had left to herself to spend on herself in her last years. You were going to give me her grocery money and call it generous. He didn't answer. I think we're done with the waiver, Sandra said. Marcus did not leave the room gracefully. He sat back down when Fitch told him to, But he did it the way someone sits when they're calculating rather than accepting, and he spent the next 40 minutes speaking to Fitch in a low, urgent voice while Sandra walked me through the trust transfer mechanics and Calloway organized his documentation for the copies he would be delivering to the Hillsborough County Financial Crimes Unit the following morning. He had called a personal attorney by the time we walked out. I could hear him in the hallway, voice compressed and rapid as we waited for the elevator. Devin found me near the elevator bank. He looked uncomfortable in the specific way of someone who had come for one thing and gotten something entirely different. I didn't know, he said. I know, I said. I believed him. My mother was sitting in a chair in the reception area when we passed through. She looked up when she saw me. She didn't say anything. I stopped. She knew what he was doing, I said. She didn't confront him. He just made sure I was protected. That's what she did with the time she had left. My mother looked at the floor. I didn't know about the money. I believe you, I said. I wasn't sure that I fully did, but I said it because it was the version that allowed us both to keep standing in the same room, and because even in that moment I understood that my mother's failure was not the same kind of failure as Marcus's, even if it had felt the same to me for years. We didn't hug. We didn't make plans. We stood there for a moment in the particular awkwardness of people whose relationship has just been permanently reorganized and hasn't yet learned its new shape. Then I walked out. Kwame was parked outside. He had driven down from Atlanta with me and spent the morning at a coffee shop 3 blocks away, texting occasionally to ask if I was dead. When I got into the passenger seat, he looked at my face and said, "How bad?" "It's done," I said. He nodded. "How are you?" I thought about it. Outside the window, downtown Tampa moved past, pedestrians, a food cart, a dog being walked by a man in a business suit. The ordinary business of a Tuesday afternoon in a city that had no idea what had just happened on the 14th floor of that glass tower. "Tired," I said. "And something else I don't have a word for yet." "That's okay," Kwame said, pulling into traffic. "You've got time." The forensic accounting report was submitted to the Hillsborough County Financial Crimes Unit on a Thursday. The following Tuesday, Marcus's attorney contacted Sandra Okafor with a proposed restitution arrangement. Sandra told me about it over the phone and asked what I wanted to do. "What are my options?" "He can agree to full restitution, $318,000, on a structured payment schedule in exchange for your cooperation in keeping this a civil matter rather than a criminal referral. Or you decline and Calloway's report goes to the state attorney's office, and Marcus faces possible charges for elder financial exploitation, which in Florida carries significant penalties given your grandmother's age." I thought about it for 2 days. I thought about my grandmother driving every neighborhood herself, interviewing every tenant, organizing 40 years of receipts in a fire-rated cabinet in the spare bedroom. The phone call in 2017, "Keep copies of everything," delivered in her straightforward way with no drama, because she had understood exactly what was happening and had already decided what to do about it. She had not been a woman who believed in punishment for its own sake. She had believed in consequence, which is different. Consequence followed from action with the logic of cause and effect. It was not personal. It simply was. I called Sandra back. Full restitution, structured payments, criminal referral delayed pending compliance. If he misses a single payment, the referral goes immediately. "Understood," Sandra said. "And I want it documented that the referral is still available. I want him to know it's still there." It took 4 months for the properties to be formally retitled. During that time, I hired a property management company, a decision my grandmother would have disagreed with and which I thought about carefully, and which I ultimately made because I lived in Atlanta and could not drive to Lakeland at a moment's notice the way she had, and because the properties deserved to be managed by someone whose entire attention was on them rather than split between them and my actual career. I found a woman named Rosario who had managed residential portfolios for 12 years and who drove every neighborhood herself and interviewed every tenant personally, and who, when I mentioned this in our first meeting, looked at me and said, "That's the only way to do it." I kept the Clearwater house. My mother lives there. We have not resolved everything between us, and I don't know that we will. She calls on Sundays now, which is more than she called before, and the calls are shorter and more careful than they used to be, which I think is the version of honesty that's available to us right now. I accept it. Diane and I celebrated with dinner in Atlanta the week after the meeting. Just the two of us at the Italian place in Little 5 Points we'd been going to for 10 years. She ordered a bottle of wine that was more expensive than our usual and said, "Your grandmother would have liked this. She would have approved of the price point," I said. "She wouldn't have ordered it for herself." Diane laughed. "But she would have let you order it." "Yeah," I said. "She would have." I think about Eleanor Voss often. Not in the sharp, grief-defined way of the first months after she died, but in the quieter way that happens when someone has shaped the way you move through the world and you keep noticing it. The way I maintain files. The way I follow through. The way I believe in showing up to things, even difficult things, even things you would rather not attend, because presence is a form of integrity, and she taught me that without ever using those words. She trusted me with the thing she'd spent 41 years building, and I held it, and I am still holding it. I don't know what Marcus expected. I think he expected me to be who I had always been to him. The peripheral one, the one in Atlanta, the one without the easy confidence and the good suit. The one whose grief and whose grandmother's love he could fold into a distribution proposal and solve with $40,000 and a post-it note. I think he forgot, or perhaps never understood, that the one who is quiet is not always the one who doesn't know. Sometimes she is exactly the one who does.